All right, hello everybody. We're here at AAMI neXus 2026, and I'm here with one of the last sessions of the day talking about standards, conformity, and management. And all right, let's go through names first. We have Janet Prust, David Osborn, and Nick Decker. And you guys, this was a pretty interesting session because almost right off the bat, you had people coming at you with questions. So they came in knowing that they had specific topics to discuss. How did that go? What was there anything that really jumped out at you here? Nick, let's start with you.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I always like a panel when the audience is engaged, right? I think one of the questions was raised about standards management process and just how technical subject matter experts can sometimes be, they're busy, they've got a lot on their plate, and they have other topics like driving innovation for patients. How to pull them into assessing the new and changed standards. And that's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So that one was actually kind of fun to respond to because we've been working through some of those challenges ourselves. And yeah, so I thought that one stuck with me as an interesting question and very practical too. I think everybody had a really good response on how to look into or how to improve that dialogue with some of the experts that we have.
That's great. And I should point out for those watching who aren't too familiar with what this session was all about, that's really exemplary of what you guys were talking about when we talk about standards management, right? We're talking about uh, you have a standards collection, and is it that you don't know something is updating, or you might need something to accompany it, like say a TIR? Is that really the question there?
No, it's more a matter of knowing what's coming, particularly for those things that you're already complying with or already dealing with,
Mhm.
but they change. The average standard is updated with an amendment or a new addition at least every 5 years.
Sure.
And so it's not static. And sometimes those changes can be significant. Sometimes they're not. And if you don't pay attention, you end up getting dinged in an audit because there's a new one out and you don't know about it. And one of the expectations, certainly in Europe, is that you know about it.
Yeah.
And here too.
And here too, but,
too.
but particularly in
Yeah.
Europe.
Yeah. So the topic of standards management for larger companies is known,
Mhm.
right? There you need to have a standards management program in place in the company that tracks which standards that you use in your regulatory determination, the claims you make for your product, your compliance piece of it. And then you also need to know which standards when those change, right?
Yeah.
So that's what Dave is speaking to. So one of the questions that came up that I thought was interesting from our moderator, Lena Cordy Bancroft, is she asked, like, who owns standards? What function owns standards? Is it the lab? Is it
Oh,
regulatory
within the organization.
yeah,
Okay.
functions within the organization? And the answer that came out is typically it tends to fall within kind of a regulatory area. Although it varies depending on the company. It depends on whether the company is a big multinational company, has a lot of different types of product lines, or if it's domestic only and has a relatively limited product line, but typically that falls into a regulatory function. So that's the overall responsibility for management. But the other part is the individual standards also have an owner typically, and that tends to be the technical person who is the product expert for that particular standard, because they would know
Right.
how that standard affects the product, and if there's a
And
change,
that might
what
be
to
a
do.
regulatory person, that might be a quality
Yeah.
person, it might be R&D, it might be a tech writer. It
Yeah.
depends upon the content, the nature of the standard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I have seen even along the lines of with some of our sterilization standards, we're being contacted by the person in the lab,
Mhm.
right? And that
Mhm.
they're boots on the ground and they have questions.
Right.
So that's very good. Now, granted, Janet, you mentioned that in a lot of cases, the big companies already know that this is something that is important,
Yes.
right? So I take it, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not where the questions were coming from in the room today. Did you get an idea of who was
50-50,
asking?
50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had some, I'll call them medium size, where they're struggling.
Mhm.
We had some small ones who didn't know what to do. But one of the things I brought out was the fact that early in my career, I worked for a very tiny little company, not in healthcare, but um, my management knew that the ANSI standard for that technology was important to the company. And so I got sent off and learned the standards process many, many moons ago.
think that the challenge was people had a lot of questions of like, how do you resource it?
Yeah.
Right? Let's move beyond, understanding that it's important and which standards apply, but how do you resource it? How do you demonstrate the value of it, like a return on investment? Because management in any size of company wants to understand the value before they apply resources to it. And so for the smaller companies, it was more of a challenge. It wasn't dedicated standards people that either participated or managed the standards within the company. It was more maybe a product engineer, and they had to do this in addition to their regular job, which
Or a
is how
regulatory engineer.
or regulatory,
talking about
which is how I
resources.
participated for years. There was
Yeah.
no time dedicated to standards, and so you do that on top of everything else. So giving them some examples of like, how do you demonstrate the value of it? How do you demonstrate the value? Is it because there's a product change coming and you know about it ahead of time so that you can resource the work that needs to be done to still claim compliance with that standard? Or did something bad happen?
Or was
then-
something bad about to happen
Right.
and you prevented it.
and would
Then-
have
Right.
cost avoidance. So those are some of the interesting questions.
So a
that
little
came
bit
from the
of
audience.
upwards management. That's
Oh, there's a lot of
Oh,
that.
Good way to put it. Yeah.
One thing that I thought, as you guys are reflecting, I'm thinking as well, and it's actually quite interesting because while there were some questions in the different size organizations were at different places in their standards management journey, I think we could gather from the questions. Those resourcing challenges are
Every
also a
size
problem
of
in
company.
large companies, right? And so there's some differences depending on the size of company and the markets that you're operating in, especially how the standards may be treated by the regulators. But there's some real common denominators across, regardless of the size of company as well.
What we find is that our investment in standards probably has at least a 10-to-1 return in terms of cost avoidance, cost saving, problem saving.
Shorter
But
time to market.
Shorter time to market, but we actually have a process where we try to document that because, as Janet pointed out, it's an absolute revolving door at the top. And so we're constantly having to re-educate new senior managers.
Okay.
And having that data is an important element of
critical.
that re-education.
Something that we see a lot at AAMI, I'm thinking in particular of human factors just because I've been talking about HE75 all day, but there's a lot of standards that follow this same cadence where if it's a standard that is just on the radar of a new innovator, right? Somebody who's just, maybe it's a small company or an innovation inventor who wants to make a cool idea happen. Sometimes the last piece of the puzzle is they finally look at the standards. And you mentioned time to market. That's really when it all goes wrong. They go, oh, I need to reverse engineer half of what I've done.
And I
so
need a
that-
quality system.
I need a quality system. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a strategic approach, right? That's a catch-up
exactly.
approach,
Yes.
right? So the message that we had this afternoon was really make your standards management program a strategy for your company, for your particular products, for your new product life cycle. That's the benefit of it.
And so I'm wondering if there was at least one or two, I guess, gems of knowledge that you would share with the folks that you saw here that could be at least the starting point for thinking about this standards management approach.
I think we already did that, Brian.
I mean, we already talked about process a little bit. I think
Yeah.
one thing that, embracing tools like AI, I think can be really helpful to work into your standards management process to make it more efficient. I mean, as I said, we've kind of lived through this. You do need to review the standards that are coming through. And when we're large multinational, large portfolio means a lot of standards are coming through, and we have flagged those that are relevant for our portfolio. But new ones come up, and we're always asking the question: should we be following this one as well? So it can be overwhelming. I think that every company feels it probably, and using tools at our disposal like AI and really making that process as efficient as possible, I thought was an interesting part of the discussion.
We have a scoring rubric for new standards where we ask the businesses, and often I direct it because I have some preconceived knowledge about who it might be important for. And it's a very qualitative assessment from you don't care to it's strategic, and a few steps in between. And then based on that, from multiple businesses, we assign a rubric for Philips. And if it's really important, then it means not only should we be there, we should be trying to get the pen in our hand. We should take a leadership role.
And that's that standards development side of things. Get
Right.
somebody at the table.
Get somebody at
Right.
the table.
Okay.
And that could be a totally new standard, or it just could be a revision to an existing standard. And as I alluded to, it was a very expensive mistake when one of our businesses ignored a new standard, and it has cost billions.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that, my nugget is that standards management, standards participation is a competitive advantage,
Yes.
right? We don't tend to think about it that way. We tend to think of it as a technical aspect, a technical process, a regulatory process. You got to do it, but there's
that
a
resource
there's
inside of
a
it.
there's a real competitive advantage of participating in the standards development process and establishing a standards management program that allows you to be efficient at it, maintain your compliance, but then also speed up your time to market and some of these other things that you can actually put an ROI around.
One of the things we didn't talk about is the whole standards policy aspect in both ISO and IEC, and then nationally. There's another whole domain which is affecting how the process itself works and is implemented. And that can be very, very significant. But in order to earn your way up to that, you not only have done some standards, but you've also got to do some heavy lifting on the policy side.
Right.
And that's another venue that could be another whole topic for the future.
I'm gonna borrow from, actually, it was mentioned several times in earlier sessions, and that, again, as you guys are reflecting, I'm more things are coming to my mind. But one interesting kind of takeaway that I'm seeing as I go through the various sessions in ours as well is that at the end of the day, right, as we've all said, standards, we need to keep up with them for compliance, and it does help time to market. But the word that continues to come to mind, and it's been said several times in all these sessions, is the patient, right? And I think that it's at the end of the day, there's a lot of work that goes into the standards. There's a lot of work that goes into complying with the standards and maintaining your process and keeping up to speed. But at the end of the day, I think it's to the ultimate benefit of the patients, which I think everybody who's part of the standards development organizations and efforts, it's a common goal across all those stakeholders.
That's for public health and patient safety.
Absolutely.
And that is the driver. Occasionally we'll get an expert who doesn't quite understand that or has a narrow, potentially corporate agenda.
But they get educated.
But they get educated. And as a leader, I typically, when I see that, figure out which question I'm going to ask which clinician to drive home the point. Because fundamentally, everybody is there for that, but not everybody has the same understanding today. We sometimes have to educate a little bit, but it's one of the things that makes working in standardization in healthcare a lot more satisfying and interesting than in certain commercial areas, because it is all about public health and patient safety.
The people can be very inspiring because there's a lot of passion in the standards rooms. I think something that maybe some of our viewers who are not involved in standards development might be thinking as they're envisioning these rooms, corporate fat cats and cigar smoke, all agreeing on the best way to move forward. But it's never the case. There's a lot of cat herding, and there's a lot of passion. A lot of people getting
It's
to know each other.
multicultural cat herding, and it can be quite politically challenging to deal with that. The English skills of some of the participants are not as good as some others. Many of the Northern Europeans have much better grammar than the Americans do.
Or they think they do.
Well, no, in many cases they do.
I think what's an interesting point, though, right? And you were speaking general. You mentioned corporate, right? But I think done correctly, the standards development process is in a consensus manner and open to all stakeholders, right? So
Exactly.
I think in that case, right, you have corporations there, but you have regulators there in an ideal case. You have patient groups represented there in an ideal case, right?
Test houses.
Users of the product.
Users, exactly. You've
Absolutely.
got, and I think that's kind of the beauty. And it was mentioned in, I think, the opening comments this morning or earlier this afternoon that's kind of unique to standards, and it's a bit of a beauty in the technical
Absolutely.
details, right? So it's hard for a reason, I think.
Yeah. Well, Nick, Janet, Dave, thank you for talking to me a little bit about this,
Absolutely.
the importance of it. If people want to find out more, we do have a course coming up that's a little bit more about, or a lot of it more about standards management and even the development process. That course starts on May 4th. You can hop over to AAMI.org, click on trainings, and you should be able to find it right away.
Strategic standards management for total product lifecycle benefit. I might
Ooh.
have benefit wrong, but the first part of it is correct.
What a mouthful.
I'll put
Yeah.
a link in the description for everybody so
Yeah,
that they can
that'd
find
be
it right
great.
away. But thank you again for dropping by, talking more about this. We all know it's important, but we really love to convey that to those who might not.
Very good.
All
Thank you,
right.
Brian, for
You're
inviting me.
welcome.
Thank you.